The Caregiver Scam, when love turns into dependency. Hey folks, Jim Parker here. Now, I know you've seen the glossy postcards of Thailand smiling faces, beautiful beaches, promises of paradise. But let me tell you something. Paradise can come with a price. I'm not here to sugarcoat it. I'm here to share the real story, the one I lived, because what started as love and companionship for me turned into something I never expected: dependency, betrayal, and a scam that nearly took everything I worked for. If you're thinking about retiring overseas, or maybe you already have, this is a story you don't want to miss. Part 1, the beginning of something that felt real. Hello folks, it's Jim here. Yeah, old Jim Parker, 68 years old, retired carpenter from Cleveland, Ohio. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know I don't sugarcoat things. I tell it the way it is. And today, I'm going to share with you something I never thought I'd say out loud, let alone put in a video. It's personal, painful, but maybe if one of you out there hears my story, you won't make the same mistake I did. Let me take you back about 3 years ago. When I first moved to Thailand, I'd lost my wife, Carol. After 35 years of marriage, cancer took her fast, and the house back in Ohio suddenly felt like a tomb. Both of my kids were grown. My son Mike is a mechanic in Denver, my daughter Susan, a nurse in Florida. They called me often, but life goes on, right? They had their own families, their own worlds, and me, I was left with silence. A buddy of mine, Frank, kept sending me photos from Chiang Mai, where he'd settled down. Jim, he'd say, you can live like a king out here for half your Social Security check. Sunshine every day, food for $2, and no one shovels snow. And the truth, I was tired of gray skies. Tired of sitting in a recliner, staring at a TV with no one beside me. So I packed my bags, sold the house, and took a leap. At first, life in Thailand felt like a second chance. I rented a modest condo outside the city, learned to ride a little scooter, spent mornings at the street market where vendors smiled at me, even if we couldn't understand each other. I ate papaya salad, sipped Thai coffee, and thought maybe, just maybe, I'd found a place to grow old with some dignity. Then came Dao. Her full name was Kanya Dao, but everyone just called her Dao. She was 42, petite, with long black hair she always tied back neatly, and eyes that seemed to notice everything. The first time I met her was at a small cafe near the market. I was fumbling with the sugar packets, trying to balance my coffee in one hand and my walking stick in the other. Dao saw me, smiled, and without hesitation, reached out to help. Careful, Papa, she said softly. That's what a lot of Thai people call older men. Papa. But when she said it, it didn't feel like a joke. It felt gentle. We talked a little that day. Her English wasn't great. My Thai was worse, but somehow we managed. She told me she'd once worked at a hospital as a nurse's aide, but after her mother fell ill, she quit her job to care for her. I remember thinking, here's a woman who understands responsibility, family, compassion. Weeks went by, and Dao kept showing up. At first, it was coincidence. I'd be at the cafe, and she'd be there. Then it became routine. She'd sit with me, help me order food, teach me a few Thai words. One day, when I struggled with my bags at the market, she insisted on carrying them. Another time, when I was trying to explain my prescription to the pharmacist, she stepped in and translated. I'm not ashamed to admit it. It felt good. It felt damn good to have someone looking out for me again. See, when you've lived with a partner for decades, and then suddenly you're alone, the silence isn't just in the house, it's in your bones. Dao filled that silence with her chatter, her laughter, her presence, and slowly, I started to lean on her. Pretty soon, she was stopping by my condo, First, it was just tea and a chat. Then she'd cook simple dishes, rice with chicken, vegetable soup. She'd clean a little, fuss about the dust on my shelves. And always, she'd remind me, Papa Jim, take medicine. You forget. I began to look forward to her visits. My days didn't feel empty anymore. And it wasn't about romance, not at first. It was about comfort, companionship. The kind you don't realize you're starving for until it's handed to you. I'll never forget one evening, my knees were killing me after a walk through the night market. Dao showed up with a small cloth bag filled with herbs. She warmed it over steam and pressed it against my joints. The relief was instant. But what struck me most was her care, the way she sat beside me, concentrating, as if easing my pain mattered to her more than anything else. That night, lying in bed, I thought of Carol. She used to do the same thing, rubbing my knees after long days on construction sites. For a brief moment, I let myself believe Dao was cut from the same cloth, a caregiver, someone who gave because she loved. Looking back, maybe that's where the trap was set, because when you're lonely, when you're aching in your bones and in your heart, you don't see the lines between kindness and dependency. You just want to believe. Dao never asked me for money in those early months. Not once. That's what set her apart, I told myself. She wasn't like the bar girls I'd heard about, the ones chasing retirees for quick cash. She was different. She cared, she gave, and I took that as proof her intentions were pure. But if there's one thing I want you to take from this first part of my story, it's this: scams don't always start with a handout. Sometimes they start with a hand offered, a hand that lifts you up, steadies you, makes you feel safe, and before you know it, you're holding on tight, too tight to let go. Even when the ground beneath you starts to shift. Back then, though, I didn't see any of that. All I saw was a woman who made my retirement in a foreign land feel less lonely. All I felt was gratitude. And maybe, if I'm honest, the stirrings of hope that life still had something sweet left for me. I had no idea that sweetness was the bait, and that's where we'll leave it for today. Friends, the beginning, the smile, the kindness that felt like a blessing, but turned out to be the opening act of something much darker. Stay with me, because in part 2, you'll see how love, care, and dependency started to blur into something I couldn't escape from, and how that blur cost me more than I ever imagined. Part 2, the gentle trap. Hello again, folks. Jim Parker here. If you watched part 1, you remember how I told you about Dao, the woman who came into my life when I was just an old widower trying to make sense of retirement in a foreign country. She wasn't flashy. She didn't bat her eyelashes or lean on me for money like I'd been warned about. No, she was the opposite. She was careful, quiet, attentive. And that's exactly how she wove herself into every corner of my life. At first, I didn't even notice it happening. That's the thing about dependency. It doesn't crash in like a wave. It seeps in like a slow leak, filling up the room. Before you realize, you're ankle deep in water. Let me give you an example. I'd always been a proud man. I built houses with my own 2 hands. Even after my knees went bad, I liked to think I could take care of myself. But Dao had this way of making me feel fragile. Not in a mean way, mind you, in a caring way. She'd say, "Papa Jim, heavy bag. No lift, you hurt back." Or, "You forget medicine again. I keep for you." And slowly, without realizing it, I started letting her do everything. Carry my groceries, handle my laundry, cook my meals. At first, it felt like love, or at least kindness. But somewhere deep down, I stopped doing for myself. Then there was the money thing. Like I told you before, she didn't ask for money right away. But little by little, situations came up where it just made sense. One afternoon, Dow told me her mother's diabetes medicine had gone up in price. I offered her some cash. Just a loan, I said. She shook her head, smiling shyly. No. Papa Jim, you help. You good man. Another time, her scooter broke down. I figured, why not pay the mechanic? After all, she'd been cooking for me for months, cleaning, keeping me company. It seemed only fair. Folks, let me pause here to say this. The biggest red flag is not always a big demand. Sometimes, it's the small ones you barely notice. I began to trust her with more. She started keeping a copy of my condo key in case you fall. Papa, she took my ATM card once when my knees were too sore to walk to the bank. I get money for you. No worry, I handed it over without a second thought. Looking back, that was the moment the line crossed. You see, trust is like a rope bridge. Strong when it's tight, but the more weight you pile on, the weaker it gets. I gave Dow little weights, one after another, until that bridge was straining. But I couldn't see it. In the evenings, we'd sit together on the balcony of my condo. She'd pour tea, and I'd tell her stories about Cleveland, about Carol, about fishing trips with my buddies on Lake Erie, about building houses through the winters. She'd nod, laugh, sometimes tear up, and I'll admit, I started thinking maybe this was love. Maybe I wasn't just some old man living out his days in a foreign land. Maybe I was starting over. But even in those quiet moments, there were cracks, like the time I told her I wanted to take a trip to the islands, just a short vacation. Dow frowned. Papa, too far. You sick, maybe. Better you stay here. I take care. Or the time I mentioned talking to my kids about visiting, she waved it off. They busy. They no come. I hear. It was subtle, but the message was clear. The world outside of Dow was unsafe, unreliable, or unimportant. She was the anchor. She was the one who cared. And that's how dependency works. Friends, it feels like safety at first, like someone putting a blanket over your shoulders. But soon, you realize that blanket is wrapped too tight, and you can't move. I didn't want to admit it, but I was slipping into a life where every decision ran through her. What to eat, where to go, how to spend my money. She was always there with a suggestion. Always there with a reason, always there with a smile that made it seem like she was doing it for my good. One night, I sat down with Frank the buddy, who first convinced me to move to Thailand. We were at a small bar, sipping whiskey. I told him about Dow, about how she'd become part of my daily life. Frank raised an eyebrow. Jim, he said, you sure you're not just her retirement plan? I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me because deep down, I knew he was right. I wasn't the strong, independent guy who had hopped on a plane to Thailand to start fresh. I was a man leaning harder and harder on someone I barely knew 6 months ago. But here's the thing, I didn't want to let go. After losing Carol, after all those nights alone in Ohio, I craved that warmth, that attention. Dow gave me what I thought was missing in my life. And when you've been starved of something long enough, you don't question the source, you just eat. Folks, if you've ever felt lonely in your later years, you'll understand. When someone steps in and makes you feel cared for, it's easy to close your eyes to the warning signs. The truth is, by the end of that first year, Deo wasn't just helping me, she was managing me. And I was letting her. Looking back now, I see how carefully it was all laid out. The little favors, the small loans, the constant reminders that I needed her. It was like she was tightening invisible strings, one by one, until I was more puppet than man. And here's the part I wish someone had told me before I left the States. Love in a place like Thailand, especially when it comes fast and feels easy, often comes with hooks you can't see right away. Hooks that dig deeper the longer you ignore them. But I didn't know that then. I thought I'd found someone who cared. Someone who gave me back a piece of what I'd lost. What I didn't realize was that the stage was already set. And the next act, the one you'll hear in part 3, was where the trap closed in tight. And there was no easy way out. Part 3. Warning signs in plain sight. Hello again? Friends, Jim Parker here. If you've been following my story, you know how Dao, the young Thai woman who came into my life, slowly became the center of my world. She cooked my meals, reminded me about my medicine, even held on to my bank card for convenience. What started out as kindness turned into something more complicated. And now, looking back, I can see all the warning signs I ignored. Let me paint the picture for you. It started with small things. One evening, I decided I wanted to take a walk down by the night market. It was something I loved, doing the lights. The chatter, the smells of grilled chicken and fresh fruit. But Dao frowned and shook her head. Too crowded. Papa Jim, you fall. Get sick. Stay home. I cook. Now, maybe you think that's just caring. And at first, I thought the same. But then it happened again and again. Anytime I suggested going somewhere without her visiting a temple, catching up with an old friend, even just sitting at the park, she'd find a reason to stop me. Always with a smile, always with a gentle, "I take care." Before long, I realized I hadn't gone anywhere on my own in weeks. And then there was the money. Like I told you before, Du was smart. She didn't come out and ask for cash in big chunks. Instead, little emergencies popped up like weeds. Her cousin's school fees, her neighbor's baby needing medicine, her motorbike repair. She'd never frame it as, "I need money." No, she'd say, "Papa Jim, I so sad. My cousin cry. No school." Then she'd sigh and look down. And what do you think I did? I pulled out my wallet. Because here's the truth. When someone makes you feel like a hero for solving their problems, you don't question it. You feel needed. You feel useful again. But one night, something snapped me out of the fog. I was at a little expat bar near Chiang Mai with my buddy Frank, the same guy I mentioned before. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Jim, how much have you spent on her so far?" I laughed nervously. Not much. Just helping out here and there." But Frank pressed, "No, really, add it up." So I did. Back at my condo, I sat down with a pen and a notepad. And folks, I'll never forget the number I wrote down. In less than 6 months, I'd spent over 400,000 baht. That's close to 12 grand in dollars. 12 grand on what? On emergencies. On helping family. On just being kind. I sat there staring at the number. And for the first time, I felt a knot in my stomach. The next morning, I confronted Dao gently. I said, "Dao, I can't keep giving money like this. I have savings, yes, but it's for my future, for my kids back home." Her face changed in a way I had never seen before. The smile slipped. Her eyes went flat. For just a second, there was no sweetness, no care, just cold calculation. But then, as quick as a blink, she was crying. "You think I bad woman?" she sobbed. "You think I use you? I love you. Papa Jim, I cook. I care. Nobody love you like me." And just like that, I was the bad guy, the ungrateful one, the old man who couldn't see how much she'd sacrificed. Folks, let me stop here and say, this emotional manipulation is the sharpest tool in the scammer's kit. They don't just take your money. They make you feel guilty for even questioning them. After that day, I noticed more things. My phone would buzz with calls from my daughter, back in Ohio. And Dao would frown. "Why they call so much?" You old now, they busy. I hear, I take care. She'd even answer sometimes. Telling my daughter I was resting, I started to feel cut off. My world shrank until it was just me and Tao. One night, I overheard her on the phone, speaking quickly in Thai. I couldn't understand most of it, but I caught a word I knew: Farang. That's what Thais call foreigners like me. And the tone of her voice, it wasn't loving. It was businesslike, calculating. I asked her later, "Who were you talking to?" She brushed it off, "Just cousin." But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The cracks kept widening. She began insisting on handling my bank trips entirely. "No need you come, Papa." "I do. You rest." She'd bring back the slip, but not the cash. "I already pay bill," she'd say. And I wanted to believe her. God help me. I wanted to believe her. By then, my dependency wasn't just emotional, it was practical. I didn't even know how much money was left in my account. Friends, here's the hard truth. When you hand over control of your daily life, piece by piece, you don't even notice the chains until they're locked tight. But I'll tell you something. The real wake-up call came one morning when I checked my balance online. I hadn't done it in months, trusting Tao to manage things. But for some reason, maybe instinct, I logged in, and what I saw nearly knocked me out of my chair. Tens of thousands gone, withdrawals I never made, transfers I didn't authorize. My life savings, the money I'd worked 40 years to build, was draining away. When I confronted Tao, she didn't deny it. She just smiled sadly and said, "Papa Jim, I use for us, for life, for love. You no worry." That was the moment I realized I wasn't her partner. I was her retirement plan, and that's when the fear set in. Not just fear of losing my money, but fear of how deep she had gotten into my life. She had my keys, my card, my trust. And now, I wasn't sure how to get out. But friends, that part of the story, how the trap closed in, and what I tried to do about it, that's for part 4. Part 4, the cage you don't see. Hello again. Friends, Jim Parker here. By now, you've probably pieced together the picture. What started as comfort, care, and companionship turned into something much darker. And I'll tell you this, when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to see. But once you take a step back, the cage comes into focus. I used to think cages were made of bars, locks, steel doors, but no. The cage I found myself in was built out of guilt, dependency, and silence. Let me walk you through it. After I discovered the withdrawals, the thousands gone from my account, I felt sick to my stomach. I confronted Tao. But instead of shame or apology, she turned it around. "Papa Jim, I do everything for you. I cook, I clean, I care. You think free, you think love free." Those words cut deep. Because part of me wanted to believe she was right. That maybe, somehow, I owed her for taking care of me. That's how the trap works, friends. They make you question your own sense of right and wrong. Now here's the thing nobody talks about. It wasn't just the money, it was the isolation. Tao had subtly, piece by piece, made herself the gatekeeper of my world. My phone calls screened, my outings limited, my friendships discouraged. It wasn't obvious at first, but the more I look back, the more I see the pattern control dressed up as care. Let me give you an example. One afternoon, I decided I wanted to go see Frank again, my old buddy, at the Expat bar. Tao smiled politely and said, "Okay." But I come too. Now, I didn't think much of it. But the moment we sat down, I noticed her listening carefully, chiming in whenever Frank asked me a question about money or life. Later that night, she scolded me. "Frank jealous. He wants you alone. He no like me." And just like that, another wedge was driven between me and the one guy who tried to warn me. You see, the scam isn't always about stealing fast. Sometimes, it's about building a world where you can't imagine life without them. And once you can't imagine it, you stop questioning. But here's the raw truth. I need every one of you listening to hear this could happen to you. I know some of you watching are retired vets, former teachers, truck drivers, men who put in their 40 years and finally said, I'm going to enjoy life. You come to Thailand or any place like it looking for sunshine, companionship, maybe a second chance at love. And guess what? You're the perfect target. Not because you're dumb, not because you're weak, but because you're human. You crave connection. You crave being needed. And they know it. In my case, Dao knew exactly what strings to pull. She started with food, care, affection. Then it became money, then control. By the time I realized what was happening, she wasn't just in my wallet, she was in my head. I'll tell you something else that'll make your skin crawl. I later found out Dao wasn't working alone. She had friends, other women in her circle, even a couple of men who specialized in finding retirees like me. They'd swap stories, compare notes, even share techniques on how to keep us hooked. Imagine that for a second. While I was sitting there thinking I'd found love in my golden years, I was just a name on a list, a paycheck. The worst part, I didn't just lose money. I lost trust. I lost time. I lost the version of myself who believed in fresh starts. And here's the kicker. Getting out wasn't easy. Because once you're financially tied up, once your routines revolve around someone, once they hold the keys to your daily life, you feel trapped. And fear kicks in. Fear that if you stand up for yourself, they'll get angry. Fear they'll take what's left. Fear they'll leave you alone in a foreign country where you don't even speak the language well enough to ask for help. That's where I was, staring at my dwindling account, watching Dao move around the condo like she owned the place, smiling at me like everything was normal, and feeling like a prisoner in my own retirement dream. So let me say this as clear as I can. To every retiree watching from back home in the States, don't let loneliness blind you. Don't hand over your independence in exchange for comfort. Don't confuse control for love. If someone truly loves you, they won't isolate you. They won't drain your savings. They won't make you feel guilty for protecting your future. I know some of you are shaking your heads, saying, Jim, I'd never let that happen. But I'm telling you, I thought the same. And yet, here I was, 68 years old, retired, halfway across the world, sitting in a condo that didn't feel like mine anymore, wondering how I'd been so blind. Friends, scams don't always come dressed as schemes. Sometimes they come dressed as sweet smiles and warm dinners. They come with gentle hands that hold your arm as you cross the street. They come with soft voices calling you Papa. That's the picture I need you to see. That's the reality you won't find on the travel brochures or the retirement blogs. Now, the question you're probably asking is, Jim, what did you do? How did you fight back? Well, that's where the story turns, because the moment I realized I had to reclaim my life, I faced a choice: confront Dao and risk everything, or stay quiet and watch the rest of my savings disappear. And friends, that's exactly what I'll tell you in Part 5. Part 5. Torn between two worlds. Hello again. My friends, Jim Parker here. If you followed me this far, you've seen the arc of this story. The warmth, the slow creep of dependency, the betrayal, and the cage I hadn't realized was around me. But let me tell you, the hardest part wasn't losing the money. It wasn't even the shame. The hardest part was standing at a crossroads, torn between two worlds, two lives that each pulled at me in ways I couldn't ignore. On one side, I had the dream I came here for, the sunsets over the Gulf, the taste of street food sizzling on the corner, the easy smiles of neighbors, and yes, The memory of when Tao first made me feel alive again. I'd be lying if I said I didn't still feel that pull. When you've been alone for a long time and someone suddenly fills that empty chair across the table, it's not easy to just walk away. On the other side was reality, the dwindling savings account, the suspicion that every kind word might be calculated, the gnawing realization that if I stayed, I might lose everything: money, dignity, even my health. You see, my friends, when you're in your late 60s, choices don't feel abstract anymore. They feel urgent, permanent. There's not the luxury of decades to rebuild from mistakes. Every decision feels like a stamp on the final chapter of your story. I remember one night in particular, I couldn't sleep. The fan overhead spun slowly, pushing around the humid air. I sat at the little kitchen table, staring at a glass of whiskey, the kind you pour when you're trying to think. Tao had gone to bed hours earlier, her phone glowing as she texted someone I didn't even ask who anymore. I opened my laptop and stared at a flight booking website, Bangkok to LAX. One click, and I could be back in California in less than 24 hours. I pictured it walking into a diner, ordering black coffee and eggs, hearing American voices again. My sister lives in Arizona. Maybe I could stay with her a while, reset my bearings. But then another thought crept in. What if I was wrong? What if Tao really did care? In her own way, what if leaving meant I'd never feel that closeness again? I'd go home to America, sure. But to what? A quiet apartment, maybe a senior center. Days filled with television and doctor's appointments. That's the cruelest part of these scams. They don't just take your money, they take your sense of belonging, your confidence to decide what's real and what isn't. I'll admit it. I cried that night, 70 years old. And I cried like a kid because I didn't know if I was about to throw away the last real shot at companionship or if I was clinging to something poisonous. I wish I could tell you I had a flash of clarity, that some voice inside me shouted the right answer. But the truth is, it was a tug of war. Every morning, when Tao brought me tea, part of me softened. Every time she scolded me for asking about the bank account, part of me hardened, back and forth, like waves hitting the shore. And let's not forget the practical side. If I left, I'd have to start over financially. My retirement savings weren't gone, but they were bruised. A return to the States meant higher costs: rent, healthcare, everything. Thailand, for all its dangers, was still cheaper. Was I ready to trade financial stability for emotional safety? Or was I trading one trap for another? I thought about my buddies back in the States. If I called them, would they laugh? Would they say, "We told you so, Jim"? I thought about my kids, grown now, living their own lives. Would they welcome me back? Or would they see me as a burden? That's the weight men like me carry. Folks, pride, fear of being pitied, fear of admitting we screwed up. Tao knew it, too. She had a way of wrapping her arms around me at just the right time, whispering, "Don't leave me, Papa Jim. I take care of you, and God help me." Part of me wanted to believe her. So, what kept me from making the decision right then? Honestly, it was the silence between those moments. The hours when she was gone and I was left alone with my thoughts. That's when the doubts grew louder. That's when I heard the voices of other expats I'd met. The warnings, the stories of men who'd lost it all. It's strange, isn't how love and fear can sit side by side at the same table. One moment you feel warmth, the next you feel a cold grip around your heart. And that's what I want you to take from this part of the story. My friends, the scam isn't just financial, it's emotional. It makes you doubt your instincts, your choices, even your worth. And when you're caught between staying and leaving, it's not just geography you're weighing, it's your entire sense of identity. That's where I was, a man torn in two, looking at flights back to America, while still clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, Dao's care wasn't just an act. I'll tell you what I decided in the final part of this story. But before we get there, I want you to really sit with this. If you ever find yourself second-guessing whether the person beside you truly loves you, chances are you already know the answer. And that truth, friends, is heavier than any suitcase I could pack. Part 6. A quiet decision. Hello again, my friends. Jim Parker here. This is the final part of my story, and I'll be honest, it's not easy to tell. Because endings in real life aren't neat little bows tied up with music playing in the background. They're quiet. Sometimes they feel like defeat, sometimes like freedom. Often they feel like both at once after months of living in that tug of war between wanting to stay in Thailand with Dao and wanting to cut loose and return home. I reached a point where silence became louder than her voice. I remember the morning it happened. Dayu was gone overnight again. Something about visiting her sick aunt. She had her story, and I didn't even have the energy to challenge it anymore. I sat on the balcony of my little condo in Pattaya, coffee in hand, watching the streets below come alive. Tuk-tuks buzzing. Vendors setting up carts. A stray dog nosing around for scraps. Life moving forward. Whether I moved with it or not, I felt old that morning. Older than my years. There's a moment in every man's life, I think, when you realize you don't have forever left. And for me, that morning, I realized something important. The little time I had left didn't belong to scams, to doubts, or to begging for crumbs of affection. That realization didn't hit me like thunder. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like a whisper I had ignored too long. I went inside, opened my laptop, and once again pulled up that flight website, Bangkok to Los Angeles. This time, I didn't hover over the button. I clicked it, booked the ticket, done. And when I closed the lid, I sat back and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. I didn't make a scene with Dao. I didn't confront her, accuse her, or demand explanations. What was the point? Deep down, I already knew the truth. And in a strange way, I wasn't even angry anymore. Just tired. When she came home later that day, carrying bags of food and putting on her sweet smile, I didn't mention it. I let her talk, let her laugh, let her pretend. Inside, I had already stepped away. That week was surreal. I lived in two worlds, outwardly the same routine, inwardly preparing for goodbye. I made quiet trips to the bank, pulled out what little was left, and wired part of it back to my account in the States. I packed a single suitcase, left most of my things behind. What did I need them for? The night before my flight, Dao asked me, "Papa Jim, you happy here?" I looked at her for a long time. She was beautiful, no doubt about it. She had that youthful glow, that energy I once thought would keep me young too. But beauty without truth is like a house without a foundation. It doesn't stand. So I just said, "I'm tired. Dao, I need some rest." She smiled, kissed my cheek, and went back to her phone. That was the last moment we had together. The next morning, I left before sunrise. No note. No confrontation, just silence. I climbed into a cab, watched the city shrink behind me, and felt both heavier and lighter all at once. On the plane, as we climbed into the sky, I looked out at the clouds and thought about all the men who had come here before me, and all the ones who would come after. Some chasing love, some running from loneliness, some, like me, caught in between. I landed in Los Angeles with less money than I'd started, but with something I hadn't had in months: clarity. Now, don't get me wrong, going back to the States wasn't easy. Suddenly, I was facing high costs, a different kind of loneliness, the reality of starting over in my 70s. But here's the thing: the pain of rebuilding is nothing compared to the pain of staying in a lie. I started small, stayed with my sister in Arizona for a while, got back in touch with my kids, swallowed my pride, and admitted I'd messed up. You'd be surprised when you speak honestly. People don't judge as harshly as you feared. And over time, I learned something. Companionship doesn't always come in the form of romance. Sometimes it's coffee with an old friend. Sometimes it's a phone call with family. Sometimes it's a neighbor who waves every morning. It's not flashy, but it's real. That's the lesson I want to leave with you, my friends. The caregiver scam, the love scams, the dependency traps they prey on something very human: our need for connection. Especially in retirement, when the world feels like it's moving on without us. But here's the truth: no amount of attention, no pretty smile is worth trading your dignity, your savings, your peace of mind. When love turns into dependency, when you're no longer free to say no, to walk away, to trust your own judgment, that's not love anymore. That's a cage. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk out quietly, suitcase in hand, and choose freedom over illusion. So if you're watching this and you find yourself in a similar situation, don't wait for the storm. Don't wait until every dollar is gone. Listen to that quiet voice inside you. Book the flight. Take back your life. I didn't lose everything. I still have time. I still have family. I still have me. And that, my friends, is worth more than any scam could take. This is Jim Parker, signing off. Thank you for listening to my story. Stay safe, stay wise, and remember, your best years aren't behind you. They're the years you live with your eyes wide open. So there it is, friends. My journey from hope to heartbreak to hard-earned clarity. Thailand gave me some beautiful sunsets, sure, but it also gave me the hardest lesson of my retirement. And if this story spares even one of you from falling into the same trap, then it was worth telling. Remember, this love is a gift, not a transaction. And the moment it starts feeling like a cage, it's time to walk away. If you found value in my story, hit that subscribe button, share it with a friend, and let's keep this community strong for all of us navigating life after 65. This is Jim Parker, signing off. Stay wise, stay safe, and never stop living with your eyes open.